Welcome to Association Chat. I am the host of Association Chat, Kiki L'Italienne, and on today's show, we're talking with Mike Morrissey. He's a chief executive of the European Cancer Organization and president of the European Society of Association Executives. And we're talking with Mike today about the challenges facing European associations. And I think that most of us in the audience are familiar with what some of these challenges might be, something like a little global pandemic. But what else do we need to be thinking about? And what's happening with the European Society of Association Executives? And what is the vision for the future? And here to answer all of that today, Mike Morrissey. Welcome, Mike. I'm so glad that you're here.
Hi, Kiki. Thanks for inviting me.
All right. So, before we get started on talking about the challenges that are facing European associations, I thought we might start by just discussing a little bit about how associations in Europe are different from associations based in the United States. And that's just so that we might better understand why some of the issues exist the way that they do. So how about some of those nuances, Mike?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I got the benefit of working for the International Council of Shopping Centres in the past, which is headquartered in New York and a great not-for-profit organisation, association. But I guess the biggest difference in Europe is the cultural one and the language one. In addition to bringing people together around a particular subject or a particular theme or profession, the association is bringing people together who have different cultures and different first languages. And that makes it a very interesting dynamic, I think, running an association which is pan-European. Of course, we have national associations in the individual European countries. But if you think of all of the countries in Europe, 27 countries in the European Union, over 50 countries in the World Health Organization's definition of Europe. That's a lot of different cultures and languages right there. And, in associations, we're all about bringing people together, right? And facilitating exchange of experience. And you've got those extra dynamics, those extra dimensions with culture and language.
Well, certainly there have been a few things that have happened that have impacted pretty much all associations and all people everywhere for the past year and a half. But as president of the European Society of Association Executives, what are some of the top issues that members have been coming to the association and asking for help with over the past year and a half?
Well, I think I'm very conscious, especially doing something as great as this with you, Kiki. I'm very conscious that there isn't a single association leader who can stand on a virtual stage and say, this is the way this is the way it's going to be. Nobody knows. We're all learning together. And one of the great things about the American Society of Association Executives, the European Society of Association Executives, is that it's peer-to-peer. We're learning from each other and we're exchanging with each other. And that's how we're learning. And I think there's never been such a big disruption in association leadership and management.
Yeah.
Certainly in my career. And the beauty of having a society where you can exchange and learn with people from your peers who are going through the same stuff, maybe in a different sector, maybe in a trade association rather than a professional society, but there's so much to be gained by just having that exchange. And also, I think, to be able to vent doubt and frustration and concern, because our job as association leaders is to keep everything together, keep the volunteers together, keep the members together, keep our staff teams together. Who's looking after us? Right.
Right.
So sometimes it's nice to be able to exchange from people that you respect, who maybe you're in a completely different sector and you wouldn't come into contact with through your day job, but can provide you with the support and exchange and experience that can help shape how you think about what the future might look like, because none of us have been in business as usual mode.
That's definitely true. And, you touched on something that I think is one of those silver linings to what's been a very difficult time for many people. And that is that with associations, we're already, in the business of bringing people together, and, associations associate. That's what we do.
Right.
And I think that silver lining is that's been where associations have been able to step in and step up and provide that sort of community when people really needed a trusted community along the way.
I think that's right, but I think the challenge has been, so much of the buzz that we have relied on in our associations has been created by the members with each other. In physical events, you get that interaction between people, which creates a buzz, a life. Think of the first day of any congress or conference. You've got members coming together, meeting each other. It's fantastic. And our job in associations is to facilitate it happening, right? And that buzz is so much more difficult to translate or to feel through a screen.
That is so true. I didn't mean to cut you off with that, but it actually reminds me of a question we got ahead of time, which is Carolyn Lugbill asked, I would be particularly interested in learning how COVID-19 has impacted the engagement of European associations and its members, and whether they are seeing a trend toward hybrid events like we are here in the United States.
Yes, and thanks for the question, Carolyn. And you're catching me at a time where I'm, I don't know, 3 or 4 months out from my first hybrid event at the European Cancer Organization. And I can't say I'm completely relaxed about it, because it's, again, another new experience caused by COVID. There's a lot of debate in Europe and amongst our members about the extent to which physical events will come back. And I think there are some people who are hopeful that physical events will come back in a big way. There are some people who think that hybrid is the way forward, because virtual participation in events in a real way, not in a sort of live streaming, just watching way that we used to do, that hybrid events are an inevitable part of the future. I don't know. I think the jury's still out. And I also think that it will not be the same in every sector. I mean, I work in the healthcare sector these days, have done for the last 5 years. And I used to run, in a previous job, I used to run a congress with 35,000 cardiologists attending. Well, when will we have 35,000 cardiologists attending one event in one city again? I hope it happens again soon. But will the employers of those doctors allow as many of those doctors to travel again? I'm sure they, as individuals, they'd love to, right? I'm sure they'd love to feel the buzz of that opportunity again. What I don't know is whether their employers will allow it, right? So that's my sector where I'm working at the moment. I don't know the answer to that. I don't think every sector will be the same. I think some sectors will rely more on hybrid than others. But Carolyn, it is a big debate that's going on right now, and we'll have to wait and see. And of course, it puts the pressure on us as association leaders, because how do you do hybrid well? And what does hybrid mean? Some people think hybrid means having all the speakers in one place and the audience joining virtually. There's lots of definitions, and I think the jury's out.
Yeah, there have been many conversations on association chat and in other groups where I think everyone's saying the same thing. How can we talk about something using the same words and mean things that are totally different? And so that actually feeds into an issue that I think a lot of people have been interested in sort of investigating, and that is, the business model for associations. When so many associations were dependent on having these in-person events as a big part of their revenue streams, how are things looking as far as the way that associations in Europe are thinking about their business models?
Well, I think that this was already a conversation before COVID
Yeah.
about associations that had a high reliance on congresses and physical events. And that was in relation to a lot of things. It was in relation to attitudes towards climate change, attitudes towards travel, who was funding whose travel, the delegates' travel, who was paying for that. So I think it was anyway on the agenda before COVID. I think COVID's accelerated that challenge. And it's been tough. There are many associations in Europe that have had to downsize, that have had to let people go, that have had to face some difficult realities in the short term. Others that either weren't so reliant on conferences or who had more in reserves have been able to get through this last 18 months. I think the next 18 months is going to be very interesting. One of the tricky things we have in Europe is we're relying on people traveling between countries within Europe that have different rules and regulations towards COVID. And that is creating real anxiety on a personal level as well as a professional level. I live in the south of France. My family, my siblings and my mum live in London. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen them for over a year because it hasn't been possible. When they were able to travel here, there was some restriction in France. When I was able to travel there was some restriction in the UK. So you've got that kind of added issue that you've got these countries, and Brexit hasn't helped that issue, by the way. So you've got the fact that you've got different countries making different decisions within close proximity of each other, makes the whole issue of travel really complicated. I don't know how it is in the States, but we are having airlines cancelling flights at short notice all the time when they're not full, I guess.
Yeah.
So we've got lots of doubt around traveling, and that is creating a lot of anxiety about the future of congresses. I personally think they will bounce back. I think it will take time. I think hybrid elements will be important. But being able to monetize year-round content and year-round engagement with your members, rather than relying on one moment in time to make 70% of your money.
Yes.
That's increasingly important now for associations.
Well, it's so interesting that you bring that up, because that 365 engagement around the year is definitely a hot topic. And I think that, the word community keeps getting brought into it, because I think that a lot of association executives are looking at this opportunity to leverage the people who come into the virtual events, to leverage that as a moment for onboarding into year-long membership, into some sort of year-long engagement, which sounds good in theory, not so easy to actually make that happen. Is that have you been hearing a lot of the same discussion happening?
Oh, definitely. And I think that if you look at the opportunity in this situation, there's a reality that not everybody in every association was able to travel. Younger people, more junior in their career, maybe weren't able to travel as easily. Virtual has kind of made it easier for everybody to be on the same level. It hasn't been the same experience, of course, but it's kind of given access to people who may not have accessed before to feel like they're part of it. And that's an opportunity that we've got to try and maximize. I think the idea that you can create a brand around your association, which is a year-round brand rather than one event brand, on which the association piggybacks on that event brand. It's the other way around, I think, now, that the event a physical event needs to be part of a year-round story, year-round narrative, and that year-round narrative and engagement with your members, you need to be able to monetize it. And so the partners that you have, the financial partners that you have, need to be able to recognize the value as much as the members. And that's a challenge, but it's an opportunity, because what many partners want is a year-round relationship with your professionals or your members, and creating vehicles to be able to do that, maybe in ways that they couldn't do physically, relying on one event a year. I think that's where the opportunity lies in this disruption.
Yeah, absolutely. John Chen, and I don't know if you've had the opportunity to connect with John Chen, but I have a feeling you get along famously. John Chen says, how has virtual been better? What are some of your best stories?
Well, my organization, thanks for the question, John, my organization is focused on the European Union in Brussels and trying to influence the European Union. And I would say that before COVID, the number of people in my organization who were coming to Brussels, getting on a plane, traveling to Brussels, meeting members of the European Parliament was very small. I was relying on the usual suspects, if you like, the same people who were either living in Brussels or had time on their hands or were real fanatics and, loved coming to Brussels. What's happened since COVID is I've got people in Romania, Poland, Spain, all over Europe who are part of the conversation. So in advocacy terms, and many associations in the States play, as they do in Europe, play an important advocacy role, I think virtual has given the chance for people whose voices who were not heard because they weren't able to go to Washington or to Brussels or wherever. I think it has given them an opportunity to have their voice heard. And that's something I think we need to find ways to keep going, even though there's no doubt that advocacy is a lot harder through a screen. The coffee, the opportunity to have a coffee or to chat casually about something off the record is much harder, of course, doing advocacy through a screen. But I think that's one way that we've seen virtual being better.
I wanted to ask you a question about something that I had seen on the European Society of Association Executives website, and it talked about this Fit for 55, and it was exploring different ways that associations could look at the European Commission's proposed package of energy and climate laws that are aimed at reaching the EU's emission reduction target of 55%. That's the 55, Fit for 55. Target of 55% by 2030. And it made me wonder how important the climate change issue was to associations in Europe before COVID, during COVID. Like, where does it fall? Here in the United States, it's looking at climate change. That's also a very controversial topic, right, and a hot topic for sure. But it's something that might be, probably I could say, is more in the aspirational goals category versus something that most associations are actively working towards as a whole. So I was curious about that for associations in Europe.
Yeah, I think it was definitely on the agenda more strongly before COVID than now, because many associations are going through major changes and disruptions, in some cases questions of their survival at the moment. So it naturally has reduced the focus on climate change. I think climate change, certainly from my perspective, was a concern in terms of the Congress model and the conference model anyway, and being prepared for a time when people would travel less because it would be less acceptable for people to jump on a plane for a 2-hour meeting, let's say. So I think there's been a lot of focus on climate change before COVID. Naturally, COVID being such a big story has knocked that kind of off the front pages, if you will, although there's this big conference coming up in Scotland, which, I think is going to, and President Biden's attitude towards climate change is obviously different than his predecessors. So there's some political change there. But I think it is an issue, and I think it's also about, it's going to be a conversation about office and home working as well. I think that there's, the benefits of office versus home working. I think there's no question that people have seen that people not having to travel so much. I used to travel. I used to be on a plane every week to go from my home in France to Brussels. I will never be doing that again. So, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of benefits to climate change. Well, there have been already because of COVID, and I think that it will be back on the agenda to some extent. But I think it's natural that associations are focusing on their business model, about their next 5 years, and that question we talked about earlier, Kiki, about how do you join up the content narrative all year round and how do you monetize it? I think that's probably a little bit more at the front of people's minds.
I think, I would have to agree. I think that, along with thinking about things in a different way, COVID has definitely fast forwarded everyone's experience with the technology behind how to make those things happen. How are we thinking about ways to bring people together in a more connected kind of way throughout the year? I think that the focus on that has really, it's really fast forwarded the advancements that we've made for a lot of different organizations just because of necessity, because we had to figure something out.
Absolutely. And we've talked so far, Kiki, a lot about congresses and events. But, one of the really difficult things, I think, for association leaders has been the fact that our boards have not been meeting in person. And our job, I always think that our job is to make sure that a good board meeting is like the cherry on the cake, right? That all of the conversations have happened in advance, so that when you get the board together, there's consensus, that you agree on a course of action, even if there's differences of opinion. But those differences of opinion are much easier to iron out over a coffee or at the bar than over Zoom.
Yeah.
And I think that that's been a very difficult combination. Here we are, associations facing their biggest disruption in at least one generation, if not more. And you can't get the leaders of that association to sit in a room together. It's not possible. And therefore the dynamic is different. So you've got a level of tension around the situation, and you've got a level of stress caused by the fact that you can't just say, listen, let's go and have a coffee and chat, talk that through. And I think it's made association life much more stressful. And so people on the staff side, whose job it is to facilitate harmony, have had their work cut out.
It's so true. And it makes me think about, it's not so much, even if you have the technology solution in front of you, the interpersonal relationship building and things like trust, things like relationship dynamics. How do you work through not just difficult decisions, but how do you work through disagreements from a distance? This has really put a lot of our interpersonal communication skills to the test, for sure. So, yeah, I mean, I would like to believe that we've all gotten a lot better at this, you know, that we've advanced. But, you know, I think that there's definitely there's some room for improvement that all of us can make, you know, because, go ahead.
No, Kiki, I was just going to share something with you because, you know, I have three managers who work with me in our office in Brussels, and I was able to travel to Brussels again in May, having not been there since last July. And I had individual catch-ups with each of them, right, as you do. And each of them, in different ways, told me something which was somewhat of a surprise, right? And not bad stuff, not you know, game-changing stuff, but stuff that surprised me a bit. And it made me reflect that maybe this way of working through the screen probably sort of emphasizes the hierarchy a bit, because everybody knows that if you want to have a conversation with your boss about something, you know, important or serious or personal or whatever, you want to make sure they're in the right mood, right? You want to make sure you catch them at the right moment, right?
Yeah.
Very difficult to do that virtually.
Right.
So all that time that we, you know, at the coffee machine, at the water cooler, all of that, you know, knowing that somebody's in a good mood and in the right place to have all of that dynamic hasn't been there. And that's made it, I think, harder for our teams to share with their managers and their leaders various stuff. So I think I think it's very difficult to sort of recreate that opportunity online. But it's something that's since that happened to me, it's made me very conscious that, you know, we can have back-to-back Zoom calls on work issues, and you can finish the day thinking that was great, we achieved so much more than we would have done in the office, but there's a big downside.
Yeah, I wonder how we make up for that. I mean, have you experimented or found any solutions that seem to be making inroads to figuring out how to solve that for your own teams?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't claim to be a perfect manager or leader or to have any of the answers, but I'm more conscious now than probably I was about making time for the small talk, for the chat, for all of that. And I think that's another problem with the way we're working, is it's very easy to fill your diary full of back-to-back stuff which you would never have done in the pre-COVID era. So I suppose making time is always the way to have a more normal conversation with your team. But on the other hand, I've found that I've built some really good relationships with working relationships with people I've never met virtually, and people maybe I would never have met. You know, it would have taken me a year to get a meeting with them, and now they're my friends on WhatsApp. You know, you know, I think it's a mixed bag. It's certainly not all bad, and it's going to take us a good few years to come to terms with what we've learned, and I don't think the learning has stopped.
I don't either. You know, I think that we still have hopefully quite a bit to learn, and that we'll learn it quickly. And Rhonda says, yes. We were talking of Rhonda before we went live. I was making a reference to your post on LinkedIn. I'm so glad to see you on here. Yeah, we both are big Rhonda Payne fans. So
absolutely.
Yes. Along with building those relationships with people that you may not have had the chance, or it would have been more difficult to connect with, what are some other positives that you've seen come out of this time when we've been forced to find new ways to do things?
Well, I think the question of engagement with our members is a really interesting one, and I think it's easier and harder to do in different associations, and I've worked in different sectors and different associations. But it's really refreshing when you know that you've got members who are really engaged, really there for you, board members who are available, who want to contribute, regardless of the stress and strain, and regardless of the fact that they won't get the spotlight, they won't get the presidential podium at the conference, who are humble, who are people who are really dedicated to their association, who are really engaged, who do anything to help you, who don't get a penny or a cent out of their participation of the association, but they want to give back. And there are many examples that I've seen during the COVID period of that. And I think it's really admirable, and it restores not restores, but it gives you extra faith in the association model, because the association model is all about that, right? It's all about giving a helping hand to somebody who's got less experience than you, giving a connection to someone who needs one in a certain way. And I think that is just, in a way, the COVID crisis has empowered associations to offer something that we took for granted a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So I have been asking all of my guests recently this question because, and I had referenced it a little bit earlier, but what does community mean to you? I'm going to show that again. What does community mean to you? Community's been a big hot topic, and it's definitely a word that's been thrown around quite a bit lately. But in the context of our conversation today, what does community mean to you?
Well, I use the word community a lot in the roles that I've had in Europe, and I also use the word family too.
Mm-hmm.
I think associations can be a little bit like families, in that there is a passion, a love, if you will, for the subject matter, for the thing that brings everybody together. But sometimes that love or passion or energy about the subject matter causes disagreements. Yes. And families disagree, right?
Yeah.
And well, I don't disagree with my family because I haven't seen them for over a year. But that's another.
Right.
But no, I think that there's a family element in all of this, and I think that our job as association leaders is to bring people together. Now, in one sense, community can mean members, right? It obviously includes members, but it also includes a wider group of stakeholders who are important to those members. And I think whether that's in advocacy terms, whether that's in event terms, whatever the activity is, I think being more inclusive in an association is always better than being restrictive to define community as only your members, because there are always people outside who should be inside, and the more generous you can be in your inclusivity, and the more you can facilitate harmony rather than conflict within your community, I think the better.
So Rhonda chimed in and said, leaders who are humble and in the work for the outcomes, not the shine. So phenomenal. And this was talking about your comment earlier. It reminds me of a question I wanted to ask you about some of the people who have been stepping in and volunteering and getting more engaged. Have you seen a shift or a change in either the types of people who have been volunteering or the amount of volunteering? What have you been seeing happening as far as, people stepping into volunteer leadership roles within associations?
Well, I think that people who dedicate themselves to an association have different motives, right? They have different aspirations, they have different talents, right? And I always think our jobs as association leaders is like being a conductor of an orchestra, and sometimes you need somebody who's got a loud voice and who's got a big ego and who's ready to stand at the podium, and ready to perform. You need that person, but you also need the person who's the modest one, the quiet one, the one at the back of the room. Our job is just how to put all of those different personalities together to make a good orchestra, right, if you will. Yeah. And I think it takes all sorts. And I think the most important thing from our perspective as the facilitators of associations is to be able to have honest and upfront conversations with all personality types. Mm-hmm. And my first career, I was a top tennis umpire, and I umpired big matches at the US Open, and I umpired finals at Wimbledon, and I had to deal with big egos, right? People.
I bet.
I had Andre Agassi shouting at me in front of millions of people on television, and sometimes association life isn't so different, but the most important thing is that as an association leader, you are able to have those difficult conversations, regardless of whether it's somebody who's a volunteer or a leader who has strong opinions and a loud voice, or somebody who's at the back of the room with a quiet voice. You need to be able to facilitate that working together in a common way, and bring consensus and direction as best you can. I think that's what's fascinating and enjoyable about our jobs.
Mm. So when you think about one of the big ways that we were promoting this particular discussion was in talking about your vision for the future. Where do you see things going for associations? The European Society of Association Executives role of president is a very important role, and so where do you see the future leading us? What do you see in the future for associations in Europe?
Well, I think we're asking ourselves this question maybe more loudly than we did because of COVID. Mm-hmm. But every association, I believe, has to be ahead of the relevance question. Mm. If you wait and you rely on business as usual, and if you wait and you rely on copy and paste from year to year, one day, at some point, you will fall behind on the relevance question. Relevance, in my opinion, is the fuel that keeps associations going. If you're relevant to your members, relevant to your sector, relevant to your audience, you're going to be okay. The money issues, the other issues that come with running associations, they'll sort themselves out if you're relevant to your members and to your audience. But to be relevant, you've got to be humble. You've got to constantly ask yourself, how can we be better? You've got to be able to listen. Your members have to be able to speak truth to you and say, actually, that wasn't so good, and be well treated for saying that. So I don't think the question has really changed. As association leaders, we always have to ask ourselves, is our association relevant, and how can we do better? And how can we, as leaders in associations, facilitate that conversation internally so that we're not just sitting back and kicking back and being happy with our success if we're successful? Because if you do that, if you get into that arrogant kickback game, it's going to bite you sometime. So I think that being relevant, being ahead of the relevance question is the first, second, third, fourth, fifth thing that any association has to do. And I guess to do that, when you know what the answers are to the relevance question, you've got to be nimble and flexible enough to do it like that. You cannot be an organization to be ahead of the relevance question that takes 10 years to change. You need to be constantly capable of reinventing yourself as an organization, with respect for the past, with respect for history, but you've got to have the ability to implement something new and innovative as soon as everybody agrees it's a great idea.
I love that. I love that response. I think that so many of us are looking at agility, the ability to change and adapt quickly. And if we didn't look at it with like a hyper focus before, we certainly are now, just because we've been put to the test with it. We've had to adjust many things in our lives. And so with that, I want to ask you more of a personal question, and that has to do, I know, get ready. That has to do with some of the changes you yourself have made in the way that you have chosen to work and live and operate. You know, certainly this focus, I've had some friends who call it the Great Reset, you know, this focus on reassessing the priorities we have in life, the way that we do everything from shop to educate our children to go to work. It's caused many of us to think a little bit deeper and to think about our own lives and the changes that we want to make. What are some of the changes that you've maybe made or decided that you want to make in your own life based on your experience through the past, year and a half?
Well, I've been with my partner for nearly 25 years and I've never traveled less. So it obviously was enforced because of COVID, but both of us have really enjoyed it, So I think from my point of view, my attitude towards travel has changed dramatically. I used to be one of these people that, kind of felt kind of cool about getting a gold card from an airline, and all of that. And, a bit strutty when it came to walking into an airport lounge.
The lounge.
Kind of thing. It's a glass of champagne to have there, let's face it, or two, Kiki.
Yeah.
But I don't care about that anymore. I really don't care. And, some of the airlines will be disappointed hearing that maybe, but all of this stuff, all of their promotion that they're doing at the moment, I'm not zoomed in on that at all. I think my attitude towards travel was wrong. I think I made many trips that I didn't need to make. I'm a people person. I love being with people. I'm an international person. I've worked in 70 countries all over the world. I love travel, and I'm sure I always will. But I think I made too many personal sacrifices.
Fair enough. I think a lot of people can identify with that. The association industry is full of road warriors, and I've heard a lot of similar stories. But, that's something at the beginning of the year. I'll tell a quick anecdote. At the beginning of 2020, I posted a little index card on the family calendar, and I said, the goal is for us to have dinner as a family together one night a week, because that was pretty much all we could really manage when everybody was doing everything that they needed to do. And then when COVID hit and we had every single meal every single day together, I looked at that. I didn't even think to look at the index card until a couple of months in. And I thought, I never want that to be the goal. What a sad, sad goal to have dinner as a family one night a week. That was it. And that was a goal, right?
Right.
So it definitely does change, your perspective when you have a chance to reassess.
It's all about balance, right? It's all
Mm-hmm.
about balance, and it's because we have passion for what we do, and we want to facilitate success, and we want to be in the room. It's all for good reasons. There's no bad intention there at all, but it's revealing that there are ways that we can work differently, and now I guess our job is to balance that out and find the happy medium at some point in the next few years.
Yeah, well, that's a goal for us, right? Rhonda says, my pet peeve, don't use vanity metrics and positive spin to fool yourself into believing relevance is intact. That's a trap, and you are not fooling the community. That is very true. The community knows. We all, people know. They know the truth, whether you're actually hitting that, you have that relevance, you're actually hitting on the point you need to, or whether,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, and I think there can be that disconnects can happen in associations. It's our job as staff to make sure that doesn't happen, but the disconnects can happen within the membership.
Mm-hmm.
That's important to ensure that young people are getting heard, people in different countries, different people from different backgrounds are getting heard, so that the volunteer leadership, make the right decisions. That's extremely important to facilitate, because we know that different parts of the leadership can represent different sections of the membership, and that's where things can go awry. But I think if you're in touch as an association leader or manager or executive, if you're in touch with people and you're listening as much as you're talking, at least as much, you'll pick that up pretty fast.
So, I warned you ahead of time that we have a question of the week that the community, the online community for association chat, will respond to, that they'll answer. And I ask my podcast guests the question of the week to get their input. Well, this week's question of the week is, what gives you energy and how do you energize other people? So, not to put you on the spot or anything, but what gives you energy? Here you are. You obviously have so many different interests and you've had so many different experiences. I'm very curious to hear your response.
Well, I've been thinking about it since you prepped me, Kiki, on the question, and I think I've had the opportunity to work in different associations and with loads of different people from different backgrounds and ages and cultures and so on. And I think that what gives me energy is a realization that happens not every day, but luckily quite a lot of days, that I'm somehow making a positive difference.
Hmm.
And that, when I realize that, and occasionally when people say that, it gives me a buzz, it gives me energy. And sometimes you realize that out of the blue, when you're not expecting it. Sometimes you realize it over a longer period, when I've had situations where I've had to rescue associations from a difficult situation, whether it's financial or relationship or whatever. And I think that when you realize that you actually did make a difference to someone or some organization, that gives me a lot of energy, and that's what I do association work for, because I think it's too important, right? It's too important. Whatever the cause of the role of the association in society, it's always worth it. And how do I energize other people? Well, I think our job is about joining the dots,
Mm-hmm.
right? Seeing something over here in the association is connected to thing or someone over there. And joining the dots, I think that's how I bring energy. I think I bring things that are new, and sometimes I think that not being an expert in the subject matter of the association can help. You know, I work in cancer. I used to work in cardiology. I used to work with Rhonda in shopping centers. You know, very different I used to work in tennis. Very different sectors. Sometimes it's easier to join the dots between people or situations, and I think that can bring energy to an organization and to people.
Oh, what a fantastic answer. Oh, I have to say, Mike, this has been such a phenomenal discussion. You know, I'm so thankful that you took the time to talk with me today. You know, I guess for my final question, you know, if there was anything that you want to send as a message to association executives who are watching right now about the association community or the association industry at large, what would that message be?
Well, you're performing a role which is extremely important. People maybe haven't been telling you that over the last 18 months. You might have been going through some internal stress and anxiety. You might have been missing some of the stuff that you used to do day in, day out. But I think you've got to have faith. I think you've got to believe in the mission of your organization. And if the mission hasn't been the focus of your board or your president or your organization as a whole, getting it back to mission, focusing on the relevance, you can't go wrong with that. The money, the other issues, all of that, the events, the hybrids, all of the sponsorship, all of that will follow if you can focus on your mission, focus on relevance.